Thanks for inviting me. And I just wanted to open by saying, isn't it fabulous that a town outside of the big cities in Australia is birthing a revolution in health? There was a gold rush not too far away from here several decades ago, and I think there's a new gold rush emerging from Albury, and that is one of health. So congratulations to you all guys for coming together to making this special, for supporting Dr. Max and Simon in creating what I hope will be a repeating event year to year, where we build on the lectures that we presented today and we build on that going forward. Because this is the last time I'm going to be talking about this at Regenerate Health, because next time it'll be something different. I also wanted to say that this is the last speech, so I hope you're all concentrating. That being said, we do save the best for last, don't we? So a little bit about me. My name's Jalal, and I have this thing going on in my head where I want to understand how things work and why they work. It's just something that's always been in me. I've always wanted to build. Maybe that's why I'm a dental mechanic. But the why is because I'm really passionate about the future generations. I want children to be as healthy as they can be. That's why we're all here, aren't we, fundamentally? And for me, it's also about service to others. I do get a little bit philosophical and esoteric in my conversations sometimes. But if we don't have a purpose, and if that purpose is not driven by service to others in whatever way it is that is our skill, whether that's regenerative farming, farm to plate food, or whether that's health, or whether that's just being a great accountant and helping avoid the tax man, then why are we living? So we have to have service to others. And for me, my service it's basically explaining and simplifying a new paradigm of health that uncovers what I believe to be a foundational aspect behind health, and is the main driver behind the underlying all the chronic diseases that we see in Western society, at least in this day and age. Something that Dr. Anthony touched on towards the end of his talk was about mitochondrial diseases being uncovered as the major driver behind all chronic disease. I'm going to explain why. This new paradigm is called quantum biology. Who's heard of quantum biology before? Love you guys. So quantum biology is basically an understanding that biology is applied chemistry, and that chemistry is biochemistry. But this biochemistry is where most of medicine is stuck at. We're stuck at the biochemistry level, and we haven't gone deeper and understood or appreciated that all of that biochemistry is run by physics, and that physics is quantum physics. So quantum biology is the understanding and application of quantum physics to biology. So this is what I think about medicine. I think allopathic Western medicine is just the tip of the iceberg, and then we have functional medicine, who the functional medicine doctors are doing a great job of getting to what they believe to be the root cause, which is diet. I'm going to explain today why I feel that diet is not the root cause. It's super important, but it's not the root cause. And underneath the surface, the iceberg, it's all about quantum biology. So today's message is to show you that health is a three-legged stool, and that three-legged stool has light, water chemistry, and magnetism underpinning everything that goes on in our body. I'm only probably going to have time to talk on light today, but they can be the others can be for future talks. So let's look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, their stats. So this is from their website. So in 2017 to 2018, 40% of Australians had one or more chronic conditions. In the last decade, the prevalence of chronic conditions has increased by 42%. So half of us are sick with one or more chronic conditions. And what's worse is that females ages 15 years and over are more likely than males to have a chronic condition. So why are women suffering more than men? And the answer to that still boils down to mitochondria, because it is the job of the women. God has bestowed them with that job of procreating and raising that child in their womb. So they have to be super sensitive to the environment. And so their mitochondria are super sensitive to the environment. So what happens when the environment changes? The people that are designed to be extra sensitive are going to suffer first, which is why we have more autoimmunity in women than we do men. Everything is always explained by mitochondria. So Albert Einstein famously said that concerning matter, we have all been wrong. What we have called matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter, there is only light and sound. And from my understandings of quantum field theory, etc., I believe this to be true, and I believe that everything that we see that is physical in our physical reality is literally just light that has been slowed down enough for us to perceive it. When you start to look at the body in that lens, where it's all about waves, you start to understand that there's a much, much deeper layer than just food. So what is food? How is food grown? Anybody? Sunlight. Factory. Well, you know what? Say that for a Q&A, and I'll explain from a quantum lens why factory food is so bad for us. So food is essentially, it's grown under photosynthesis, right? So that means it's stored light. So once again, food itself is a light story. And so for me, food is essentially a barcode of the electromagnetic spectrum that it was grown under. This is why we say that it is beneficial for health to eat seasonal and local, because you are in a particular environment, and if you are eating food from that environment, then the mitochondria are able to match things up. Because if there's a barcode and things are getting checked, food essentially gets broken down into electrons, and our mitochondria are scanning that barcode. So who's at the checkout? Otto here, he's scanning that barcode. That barcode is being checked by the mitochondria. And so this is what a mitochondria looks like. It's an organelle inside our cell. And as you can see here, we've got an outer membrane. And then we've got this inner membrane, which is convoluted or bending in and over itself to increase the surface area. So with mitochondria, they're essentially the power plants of the cell. That's what everybody associates them to be. And there's thousands in each cell. In fact, the one cell in the body with the highest density of mitochondria is the female ovum. And so there's an epidemic of fertility going on right now. Well, I believe there is. And to me, that is the mitochondria saying this environment is not conducive to a 9-month gestation. And so if we fix the mitochondria, that turns around fertility outcomes. Mitochondria produce energy, but the most important thing, the most important line on this slide is that they are also environmental sensors. Okay, so they're sensing the environment, they're sensing that electromagnetic information from our environment and using this to drive cellular processes such as metabolism, signaling the DNA to control protein expression, etc., as well as the production of water. Because the water in our body is not water we drink, it's water that we make. So this stage of mitochondria, all right, it has 5 proteins which run along the inner mitochondrial membrane. So if we come back to here, I said that there's an outer membrane and an inner membrane. On that inner membrane, we've got these 5 proteins in Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the site of metabolism. So we've been talking a lot today about the fuel that goes into the engine, right? You know, we want to tidy that up. We want to get rid of seed oils. We want to get rid of processed foods, etc. But there's no point putting a petrol in a Ferrari engine if the Ferrari engine's running like rubbish. So we need to have those mitochondria pumping properly as well. And so these 5 proteins together forms what's called the electron transport chain. So it's not the carbohydrate transport chain or the protein or the fat transport chain, it's the electron transport chain. And so what that tells me is that food essentially is providing us electrons, and those electrons are carrying an electromagnetic information from the sun and the earth that they are then providing to the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is making sense of that and driving metabolic processes accordingly. This process of the electrons traveling from one onwards through is called the quantum tunneling of electrons, which is a quantum phenomena. So the metabolism inside our body is actually using a quantum phenomena called quantum tunneling, which is one example of the quantum physics that is happening inside of our bodies. And so I'm going to get into a little bit of the weeds about how mitochondria actually work. Hang tight with me and we can go over this in Q&A if need be. But basically what happens is electrons feed into number 1 or number 2, and then they quantum tunnel across to 3. Anyone ever heard of CoQ10? Why is it good for you? Because it helps your mitochondria transport electrons. Okay, anyone heard of methylene blue? Why is that good for you? Because it bypasses these cytochromes in the middle. So the electrons are passing through. They enter in a 1, they enter in a 2 from fat, the electrons enter in at 2, and they get carried across to 3, and then at 4, they get joined to oxygen. So oxygen is the terminal electron acceptor. Electrons don't get to number 5. They stop at oxygen. So what happens when you're not breathing properly? You become hypoxic in your cells. There's not enough oxygen to receive the electrons, which is why breathing is so important. Using your diaphragm, your nose, and that's a whole other feather in my cap, which we'll talk about at another time. But so I want you to remember that electrons are passing through and they are being received by oxygen as the terminal electron acceptor. As the electrons are passing through though, protons are getting pumped out in between the outer membrane and the inner membrane. And so these protons start to accumulate, and that's what we call a gradient. So we have proton gradient that develops between those two membranes. And what do we know about gradients? Everything is always going to slide down the hill, right? So when you have protons build up, they're going to want to come back down inside their inner mitochondrial membrane somehow, and they come down through number 5. And that is how we make ATP, which everybody associates with energy, correct? Yeah? So that is a proton gradient. That's an important thing to talk about, the ATP production. But what happens is when the protons come through, they join to the oxygen that received the electrons, and that's how we make water. So what have I just described there? I've described the reversal of photosynthesis. Okay, so photosynthesis is water, and it's carbon dioxide and water, and sunlight produces glucose, and it produces oxygen. We've just reversed it. Okay, so that's a critical thing that we need to understand. I believe that it is, whilst we are reversing plant photosynthesis, this is our own version of photosynthesis though, which I'll elaborate on later. What also happens though is that when we have an engine that is churning through fuel, there's obviously going to be an exhaust. Okay, every car is going to have an exhaust, unless it's a garbage electric car. But well, why are electric cars bad for you? Because look at the electromagnetic frequencies that you're sitting in, let alone the fact that it's probably worse for the planet from a carbon footprint perspective. But anyway, the exhaust that comes off is what we call reactive oxygen species, because those electrons, okay, those free radicals, they join to any other oxygen that might be lying around in the cell before they pass through 1, 2, 3, 4. They escape early, and they join to oxygen to form reactive oxygen species. And that is the oxidants that we are always taking antioxidants for in order to help our bodies heal and become healthy. And so what happens is we need to have some exhaust. So there is a purpose for the reactive oxygen species to do that signaling. But when you have too much, that is when we start to run into problems. So here's a little bit of quantum physics. Anyone ever seen this? Anybody know what it means? Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Let's reverse it. When you insert light into mass, you get energy. Doesn't that sound like photosynthesis? Okay. What about this? On the right, we have the chlorophyll molecule. On the left, we have the hemoglobin molecule. They look pretty similar, don't they? So on the hemoglobin molecule, there are 3 chromophores or light receptors for red light of the sun, and there's 1 light receptor for UV light of the sun. Not many of us are actively seeking out the sun, so we're not doing our own versions of photosynthesis. So how does light translate into the mitochondria and that whole story? Basically, the 4th and the 5th proteins in this mitochondrial electron transport chain, they're red light receivers. And number 1 is a UV light receiver. So the only source of proper red light and UV light is the sun. And we're doing our best as a society, under the guidance of those that are providing health guidance, we're avoiding that. We're avoiding the sun like as if it's the source of all destruction on this earth. And so what I'm trying to explain to you is that efficient energy production, efficient metabolism of food, all the healthy foods, still hinges on us harvesting the electrons from the environment, channeling them towards oxygen to produce that proton gradient that produces ATP. But we need the sun's information to do that. We need the sun to be telling number 1, number 4, number 5 what to do. And when this is absent, we have a breakdown in the efficient energy production. It's like you've got a V5. They don't make V5s very often, but we'll call it a V5 because there's 5 cylinders here. But, half of them are not working. The car's not going to run properly. And so what happens is that our electron transport chain fails. And when that fails, the mitochondria shuts down, and you need something called melatonin to repair the mitochondria. But we're all bathing in blue light, and I can send you the studies, but blue light degrades melatonin. So our own inbuilt protective mechanism to repair the damage to the mitochondria, that protective mechanism itself is being destroyed. That's one reason I'm wearing these glasses. So the inputs into mitochondria and the electron transport chain are these electrons which are coming from 3 sources. The sun via UV light, something called the photoelectric effect, which won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921. The second is food. Food is essentially a provision of light and electrons. And the third is grounding, which it was great to see some folks grounding outside today. Mark in particular set the tone. Well done, mate. So this is our heritage, and we've touched on this a little bit today. And this is where we are right now. We've got a hospital bathing in blue light. We've got everybody wearing sunglasses. We're wearing shoes. We're not connected to the earth. Wi-Fi, phones, AirPods, Bluetooth. That looks like a pretty good place to buy food, doesn't it? So what's changed? The field has changed, guys. The field has changed. Because when you detach yourself from the very source of all energy and information that fueled our evolution, the only possible outcome is chaos and disease and inflammation. So what I would like you guys to do is go and ask your doctor, what is inflammation? Because all doctors are going to say that inflammation is the bedrock of all chronic disease. All right, doctor, I get that. So then can you explain to me, define for me, what is inflammation? There's probably one doctor in Australia that I know that would be able to define inflammation, and that's Dr. Max. So don't ask him. Inflammation is essentially a lack of electrons feeding into our electron transport chain. It's too many protons that are getting stuck up here and can't get down. We might touch on that in the Q&A. Or it's both. That is fundamentally, at a biophysical level, what inflammation is. And the problem with that is that it results in inefficient energy production because you're losing energy to your environment. You have insufficient electrons, too many escaping. You're losing energy to your environment. It's like you're trying to drive down from Sydney to Albury, but you've got a leak in your fuel tank. You won't make it past Canberra. So the problem is that every battery, every power plant needs a recharge, and we recharge via sunlight, grounding, and food, but we aren't recharging properly. Another thing I wanted to say is, like, what happens if you have a deficiency in 2 of the 3 sources of energy? If you have a deficiency in sunlight and a deficiency in grounding, you're going to have to make up that deficiency somehow, so you're going to eat more food, right? And then most of us are eating food which is processed, And so that food is deficient in light information because it's processed. It hasn't been grown under the sun. And so then they have to even eat more food to make up for the deficiency in light of the processed food. So it really is this kind of three inputs that are coming into our system that are key. We can't just rely on food as a source of fuel and efficiency. We have to have the sunlight and the grounding as well. So this is the electromagnetic spectrum. And we've got radio waves and microwaves, and then we've got the visible spectrum in the middle here, which is this little strip, which we've blown up to show infrared, Roy G. Biv, and then ultraviolet light. And then after that, we've got your X-rays, your gamma rays, your cosmic rays. So from here to here, there are 73 octaves of light frequencies, which I might touch on later on. The problem is that we're not understanding the nature of the field that we have evolved from, because the Earth has a heartbeat, and that is the Schumann resonance. And that Schumann resonance is the resonating core of the Earth and its interaction with the ionosphere. And that Schumann resonance is 7.83 hertz, or 7.83 waves per second, okay? Your brain operates at 7.83 waves per second. The thalamus in your brain operates at that resonance. Anybody know what Wi-Fi is? 2.4 gigahertz. I didn't say hertz, I said gigahertz. But the Schumann resonance is 7.83 hertz. So Wi-Fi is 2.4 billion hertz, and we're operating at only 8 waves per second. We'll round it up to be fair. So the non-native electromagnetic frequencies that we are exposing ourselves to have just exploded. We've got Wi-Fi, we've got 5G. What the electromagnetic frequencies are doing is that it's allowing calcium levels to get mixed up inside the cell. It's destroying our vitamin D levels. And vitamin D is actually critical because it serves a big role in holding the calcium in the right places. It actually shores up the cell membranes. But we're not making enough vitamin D, so we'll take a pill for that, a pill for every ill. We might talk about vitamin D in the Q&A if you guys are interested. I can explain how that increases LDL cholesterol. But the problem is that non-native EMF, the levels are 10 to the 18 times more than what they were 100 years ago. A billion. Okay, so that's the mess that we are in. And the thing is that add to that, the levels of sun exposure and grounding are so much lower than what they used to be, and the nature of the food, it's processed, it's not seasonal, local, it's not regeneratively grown, and we start to paint a much bigger picture around the suboptimal health that we are seeing in society. So let's go through one example of one of these electromagnetic frequencies that I'm talking about that are man-made, and the easy one is blue light. So we tend to think that sunlight is just one uniform frequency that just rises in the morning and it's the same throughout the day. But it's actually a whole spectrum of light colors, and it changes throughout the day. But the key thing is that there's so much blue light in the sun as well as other colors to balance out the blue light. This is the light that we're sitting under right now. This is the light that is in our computers, this cool white LED. It's in our phones, it's in our TVs, it's in our laptops, it's at work, it's in hospitals, it's everywhere. And what we see here is a massive spike in blue light. Are there any other colors that are really doing a good job of balancing out the blue light? Not really. So what is blue light doing to our mitochondria? It's actually destroying the mitochondria, and this is a paper showing the mitochondria being destroyed in the retina, and that's where most of the blue light is getting in via our eyes. But it's also affecting mitochondria in our skin and our subcutaneous fat and even inside the brain. So there's a blue light receptor called melanopsin, and that is the most ubiquitous light receptor in the brain. Of all the light receptors in the brain, our brain is the most sensitive. It has the highest number of receptors for blue light. And think about the light that we are bathing under all the time. So what actually, this is a table from that paper that I just showed, but what happens is that we've got, for mitochondria, in the nanometers of 450, complex 1, which is this one here, complex 2, complex 3, and complex 4 are all having pro-inflammatory effects from light of this frequency, which is blue light. So blue light is degrading the proteins in the electron transport chain so that your mitochondria can't operate efficiently. So you can eat all the good food in the world that you want to eat, but if the engine isn't working properly, what's the point? So that's what I just said. But if the energy mechanism isn't working properly, there's one other thing that's important to consider, and that is the timing mechanism as well. So how do we sense time? So we use our surfaces to sense time. Light coming into the eye can drive our circadian clock. The skin itself has blue light receptors, which we found in 2017. So recent research to show that our skin is a receiver for blue light. So when you're in artificial lights, and if you're walking around in a singlet and short, you're sending the wrong circadian timing signal back to your brain. And the third way that we sense time is food, because the timing of when we eat food as well has a role to play in our timing mechanism. Cold as well is another kind of timekeeper, so to speak. Getting cold in the morning is a good way to reset your circadian rhythm. But this is the main ways that we are sensing time via our surfaces. And if we look at the central retinal pathway, which is the main way that we are sensing time via the eye, basically what happens is that we've got light traveling in through the eye, and it reaches somewhere in the brain called the hypothalamus that contains a nucleus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that is your body clock, the master clock that is pretty much controlling all of the other clocks that are downstream. And so the thing is that the blue light in the sun changes throughout the day. It's low around sunrise, and then it peaks around solar noon, and then it tapers back down to zero at sunset. And the brightness of the blue light of the sun at solar noon is the same brightness of the blue light that we are seeing in our screens and our LEDs, etc., etc. So we're basically telling our brains, that master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, we're telling it all the time that it's solar noon when we are looking at these computers at 7 p.m., at 7 a.m., last time before we go to bed, etc., etc. And this blue light is hitting the melanopsin receptors inside our retina, going to the suprachiasmatic nucleus and just wreaking havoc. And what happens is our 24-hour clock in our brain starts to turn faster and faster and faster. And that's how you start to accelerate time, because it no longer takes 24 hours to reset back to zero. It might take 22 hours. You do that day after day, year after year, and you start to lose a sense of time. But the sun has blue light as well, so surely that has to be bad for you. And the reason it's not is because whilst blue light can exacerbate the mitochondria in retinal ganglion cells, the red light counteracts it. Have a look again at the sun. Look at all that red light. Have a look at the red light here. There's nothing. So it's not that blue light is bad for us, it's that when blue light at these levels, unbalanced by red light, that's the type of light that's bad for us. So I've touched on this about how the nature of the blue light changes throughout the day and the brightness of our screens and how that's as strong as the blue light at solar noon. But the other key thing as well is flicker. And so all of these artificial lights, they have a flicker to them which we can't see. Has anyone ever kind of tried to take a photo or a video of their computer and they see how the screen plays up a little bit? That's flicker. And we can't perceive that if we're looking directly at the screen, but on a subclinical, beneath the surface level, our body is able to pick up on that flicker, and that is upsetting our system a lot. So the sun has no flicker. It's the only source of light that has no flicker. So it's the blue light levels, it's the flicker, it's the constant exposures, it's the lack of sun. They're all contributing towards us destroying our sense of time. Plus the timing of when we're eating food. Like we should be eating food, our dinner, at least 4 or 5 hours before we go to bed. But you know, busy lives and get the kids to bed, and it's finally, I might sit down and have a meal now, but it's 2 hours before you go to bed, and your body's still high on insulin and glucose before you go to bed. That starts to disrupt the leptin sensitivity, which Dr. Max touched on, and all the hormones start to go haywire. So the timing of food as well is critical. I wanted to tie this back to our internal economy though. So like we have this kind of, if we step up from the biophysics back to that biochemistry level that I was talking about, we've got a swapping of electrons and protons practically between every single molecule that is inside our body. And that's happening 100,000 times a second. 100,000 times a second there is a biochemical reaction that is happening. And for all of those reactions to occur perfectly, we need to have a body sense of time. So I'd like to ask you, we transact in a physical economy here where there's a transaction of goods and services. What do you think would happen if nobody had a watch, nobody had a clock, or everybody's clock told a different time? It'd be absolute chaos, right? That's what I'd like to call inflation. But inflation, inflammation, both the same thing. Loss of purchasing power, Bitcoin Ben, and loss of efficiency of metabolism and energy production. So there's more to blue light though, because aside from it just destroying our body's sense of time, it also degrades very, very important structures inside our body. I'm just going to touch on this, but DHA has been talked on earlier. DHA is basically that omega-3 fatty acid that is found inside our cell membranes. DHA converts UV light into DC electric current. That's why we are electric beings. Blue light is degrading the DHA, so then you are having degraded surfaces that can't even benefit from the sun if you are to get in the sun. And only a quantum health clinician can rebuild those surfaces, because we know how to restore the DHA back to those levels. Melanin as well is a key photoreceptor or light receptor, which is degraded by blue light, as is dopamine. And dopamine's key for things like cognition, executive function, motivation, and there's an epidemic of people that are not thinking too hard these days. They're not curious, and I would go as far as to say that low dopamine has a big role to play in that. Melatonin as well. I mean, there's a lot of people taking melatonin because they can't sleep properly, but if they just got off the screens, that would have a huge... I've helped patients get off 5 milligrams of melatonin every night just from getting rid of the blue light after 7 p.m. It's literally as simple as that. That's how powerful light is. But the other key thing is blue light has been shown to degrade all of our heme-based photoreceptors. And these are things like red blood cells. These are things like catalase. And when catalase gets degraded, that results in the development of vitiligo. So all of these skin conditions that we see have a blue light component, and they also have a lack of sunlight component as well. So the main message today for me though is circadian rhythm is key, because when you destroy a sense of time, you lose coherence and order in what I feel is your quantum thermodynamic system. The energy flows are a mess, and this is how chaos begins. And that chaos is essentially what we call in the medical field inflammation. And we have the energy mechanism and the information mechanism being fully degraded. So Doug Wallace, he was the professor that really blew the gates open about the importance of mitochondria, and how it is a very viable explanation behind all of the chronic diseases that we see today. This has stood up over time. Like, it's unequivocal now. Mitochondria is where it's at. If you want to understand mitochondria, Dr. Doug Wallace is a good place to start to really understand the nitty-gritty of it. So for me, the root cause of all chronic inflammatory diseases is circadian dysfunction first, leading to mitochondrial dysfunction. The food that we eat fundamentally results in mitochondrial dysfunction, but circadian is key. Coming back to the electromagnetic spectrum, there are 73 octaves in the electromagnetic spectrum. We evolved from just one, and that is the visible spectrum with infrared light and UV light. But what we have done is we have changed our environment so that we live outside the octave from which we evolved from. The only thing that can possibly happen when you change your conditions of existence from the ones that you evolved from is dis-ease. So how long does evolution take? I was talking to Dr. Prine a few weeks ago, and so I knew that over time, the distal part or the back part of our gut, the colon, shortened. So I asked him, in evolution, how long did it take for the colon to shorten? And he said it took 4 million years. So then I said to him, I said, you know when the first light bulb came, artificial one? He said, no. I said 1870s, so 150 years. So I followed it up by saying, is 150 years enough for us to get used to the light that we're exposing ourselves to? And he was like, that paints a pretty solid picture, doesn't it? 4 million years versus 150 years. We just haven't had the time to evolve to the light that we are exposing ourselves to. And by that, I mean the light we can see, the blue light, etc., but also the light we can't see, the Wi-Fi, the 5G, etc. And this is all junk light. So is it really modern disease? Or is it evolution? Because what's happening is when you change the octave of the electromagnetic spectrum that you were living under, the size and shapes of things change because it's a completely different signal. And that's one driver behind obesity, I believe. The size and shapes of people are fundamentally changing because they're living out of a completely different octave from the one that they evolved from. So pretty simply, health is really all about, at a quantum level, how many electrons you have, how many of the right protons you have, and choosing the right environmental signals to coherently drive the body's processes. My main message might be controversial, but food is medicine, in quotation marks. It used to be an axiomatic truth 100 years ago. And why was it fine 100 years ago? Because the stage upon which food was metabolized, the mitochondrion, had not yet been compromised. The mitochondria use sunlight, Earth's magnetism, and water chemistry to strip the food of electrons and protons and convert these quantum particles into energy. In other words, the mitochondria are using the Earth's native EMF. But we now live in a 5G blue-lit microwave world. So we've changed the resonances that we're exposing ourselves to. And the strength of these man-made EMFs have destroyed the fidelity of the native signal of the Earth and the Sun. We can't even sense the Schumann resonance as well as we could have before. So the food is medicine story has to be parked to the left because now the game has changed because the field has been changed. No signal, mitochondria can't make sense of the food. We can't make order from the chaos, which is, anyone read Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules? Life is all about making order from the chaos. And when you have the wrong signals coming in, you can't make order from that. And that's what we call dis-ease. Today's message, you are a quantum thermodynamic light being that channels DC electric current to power all of the processes that happen throughout your body. Your skin is the solar panel. Your mitochondria are the power plants. The brain holds the timing mechanism. Your body's water is the capacitor. Your collagen is the wire, and proteins are the semiconductors which amplify the signal. So what are some practical take-home applications? Stack sunrises, guys. Stack sunrises, and stack those sunrises whilst you are grounded. Take your thongs off, take your shoes off, bare feet on the ground. You have to change your relationship with light, okay? You have to think about the blue light that you're exposing yourself to, the natural light that you're exposing yourself to, how much of each, and do what you can to mitigate that. You need to ditch the sunglasses. Sunglasses are like the seed oils of light. And you need to get skin in the game. Get the clothes off, get the skin in the game. It's responsible, safe sun exposure, yes, but no sunscreen. We need to avoid blue light, wearing blue light blocking glasses, protecting ourselves from the blue light when we are in artificial light. And then obviously what we've touched on already, which is healthy foods that are regeneratively grown, seasonal local fruits, lots of grounding, and reducing those exposures to non-native electromagnetic frequencies. Honestly, guys, if you do that, most of health is not addition, it's subtraction. You got to get rid of the shit that's happening. And that's when things start to clean up because the body starts to sense the signal again. Once it gets the right signal, the size and shape of proteins change inside your body and the thermodynamic efficiency of the mitochondria go through the roof. And you'll naturally detox. A little bit about me. I'm a dentist, so I do a lot of postural dentistry, airway dentistry, as well as general dentistry. I also do quantum health coaching, and I help my patients harvest light, store it, so that they can remain in optimal health and have a long life. I'm also introducing something called bioresonance shortly, which I'm very, very excited about. On the side, I haven't had the chance to do this for a few years, but I do run a mobile dental truck, and I take it out to remote Australia and treat communities in need. This is a proper charity that I run, and any support for that would be greatly appreciated. Just some credits. Credit to Dr. Jack Cruz, a polarizing figure, but at the end of the day, a genius. And it would be remiss of me to stand up here and talk about what I've spoken about without paying homage to Uncle Jack. But also books, Light in Shaping Life, which talks about, all of the light that we ourselves make. The Body Electric by Dr. Robert Becker, Fourth Phase of Water, and just endless, endless, endless research. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow, how was that? I think I have to put my blue blockers on now. Jalal, thank you so much.
That's a pleasure.
For an incredible and incredibly in-depth and amazing look at granular level, really, really subcellular level of what's going on. So please, anyone have any questions for Dr. Jalal?
Thank you. That was very, very interesting and inspiring. A little bit scary for our age group who are suffering cataracts, and in my case, a cochlear implant. So how would what you've said relate to those issues?
So it's, I would say this, if you're going to start to reintroduce sun exposure to your eyes or your skin, for you with the cataracts, the eyes, I think the key thing is morning sun. Because the very early morning sun has low UV in it. And so there is, if you've got a smartphone, there's an app which you can download called Circadian, and you can type in your location, and it will be able to tell you when the UVA light comes out, and then when the UVB light comes out. So for you initially, I would probably spend maybe 2 weeks just exposing yourself to that sunrise light, that morning light before the UVA comes out, and then 2 weeks later start to slowly introduce the UVA light and then the UVB light. And you don't need to spend hours in the sun, you don't need to spend the whole day in the sun. It's about dosed exposures, working your way up. But like the regenerative light is the red light, but it's UV light as well provides the power for regeneration as well. And that's something called the photoelectric effect, which won the Nobel Prize in Physics for, because if we're going to excite electrons so that those electrons can fuel the regeneration, we need to have that UV light. So don't be scared of the sun, even if you have cataracts. Use the sun as the healing mechanism. I believe that the sun is the ultimate decentralized medicine. It serves anybody with whatever condition they have. They will benefit from safe and responsible sun exposure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about the cochlear implant and having the electrical?
I wouldn't say that the sun exposure would have a negative effect on the cochlear implant. I would perhaps say that exposures to man-made electromagnetic frequencies or overexposures to them would have more of an impact because it's an electrical device that's foreign, so to speak. That being said, the cochlear implant's been around for a long time, so it's quite a safe device. But think about your home and where your Wi-Fi router is. Is it close to your bed? Is it in the same bedroom? Where's your power box as well? Because you want all of that far away from the place that you are sleeping. And so that also means turning off your Wi-Fi when you go to bed. And spending a lot of time grounding, getting rid of any dirty electricity that's inside of you. And I mean, we have this thing that like, oh, let's get grounding mats and grounding sheets and stuff. And we just like come up with all these gadgets to overcomplicate the situation. And it's like, it still tears you away from what you really need to do, which is to go back to nature and to go outside and ground for free without, any of these fancy gadgets. And run the risk of getting exposed to the dirty electricities in the power grid, etc. So, yeah, pleasure.
And I just wanted to reinforce the point that you made, Jalal, which is the value of getting early morning sun. And
Yes.
if you can only get out for a short period of any time in the day, that early morning sun is so critical. And it means taking off blue blockers, it means taking off eyeglasses, removing contacts, removing sunglasses, and getting that pure, unadulterated morning sunlight into your eyes.
That unadulterated, naked eyes.
Naked eyes. And, Jake mentioned about data being the pool of anecdotes. I mean, I hear consistently that people find their health improving and even refractory errors correcting from simply just a repeated practice of early morning sun exposure. So anyone else have a question?
Thank you. That's good.
Hi. You broke down a lot of the concept that Dr. Jack Kruse delivers, and I've been following his work for ages. Can you just break down the magnetism part of the four-legged stool, because Bitcoin's the other one?
Magnetism.
Like how it relates to our everyday sunlight, I get it, the water, I get it, but the
Do you want the complicated answer? All right, so the body is full of like various space-time domains that are layered on top of each other. And all of those space-time domains have different magnetisms depending on the electron flow through them. So like if we go right down to the mitochondria as one space-time domain, then you have a flow of electrons, okay? And James Clerk Maxwell, the Scottish physicist, said that when you have a flow of electrons, that induces a magnetic field that's perpendicular to the direction of flow of the electrons. So the mitochondria had their own magnetic field. And that is why the heart has a magnetic field that can be sensed 22 feet away, because it's so dense with electrons. That was a Harvard study in 2016. So the mitochondria have magnetic fields, and then you collect mitochondria together. And if the mitochondria are not spaced apart inside the cell, but they're closer together, then that results in a cell that has greater magnetism. So that's another space-time domain, like the mitochondria collectively. And what those magnetic fields are doing is they're controlling the quantum particles that are carrying the magnetic information. And those quantum particles are the protons. So the magnetic flux of the sun and the earth is buried in the protons, which are being pumped in that intermembrane space. And so those protons, they get contained through a process called magnetic containment, so that they stay where they are and they don't get lost. That's like a couple of the early or deep layers space-time domains, but then there's like the big macro view, which is like the Earth's magnetism, which is slowly waning over time. I think that's just happening naturally, to my understanding, but at the same time, our ability to sense the Earth's magnetic field is worse because of all the non-native electromagnetic frequencies and because of our degraded surfaces.
Thanks, Dr. Jalal. I've heard a few of your talks now, and every single time there's another piece of the puzzle which is crystallised for me. And one of the ones I was hoping for you to speak about was something that Dr. Max mentioned in his talk, and that was leptin.
Sure.
And leptin sensitivity.
So you'd like me to talk about that? How long have we got? No. So, if you're driving from Sydney to Albury, but the fuel gauge doesn't work, you're going to be shitting your pants the whole way, aren't you? Because you're like, are we going to make it? Do I need to pull over? That's what leptin resistance is. You don't know how much energy is on board. And so leptin gets released from our subcutaneous fat, which, as Dr. Max explained, is an important endocrine organ. So leptin gets released from the subcutaneous fat in the darkness of the night, which means darkness of the night, that means no blue light, okay? And it acts on the leptin receptors in the hypothalamus to tell the brain, all right, this is how much energy we have on board. Literally, this is how much fat storage we have on board. But the problem is that there's something else that fights with leptin to act on the leptin receptor, and that's insulin. This is why eating food too late into the night is bad, because if you're going to sleep 2 hours later, what happens is that's going to raise your blood glucose and your blood insulin, and then insulin's going to fight with leptin. It's like two guys fighting for the same girl. Insulin always wins. I'll be insulin in this regard. And so insulin always wins. Leptin never gets to dock on the receptor and say, this is how much energy we have on board. And so then the fuel gauge doesn't work. And so then what happens is you go into a state of survival because you're out there hunter-gathering and you don't perceive there to be any food around. And so when you do get food, the first thing you do is you store it in your subcutaneous fat because you think that, all right, it's a bad time, I'm going to save this for a rainy day. And so you're not actually utilizing that for metabolism. The other thing is that blue light actually increases blood insulin levels and it increases blood glucose levels through some very technical pathways which I won't get into, but the studies are there. And so just being in blue light itself, even if you ate dinner at 5 p.m. and you're going to go to sleep at 10 p.m., but you've been bathing in blue light, you've increased your blood insulin levels, which is going to fight with leptin, and so then your body never gets the signal. So what happens then is a breakdown in thermodynamic efficiency of the body, because we just don't know how much energy we have on board. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and to that point, the pathways that are regulated or influence the ability to make blood raise insulin and glucose, irrespective of food, that they is something that Dr. Jack Kruse has talked about quite a lot, and specifically with regard to a gene called pro-opiomelanocortin, POMC, and that's probably another whole series of talks. Yep. But essentially a gene that mammals evolved with in response to earlier extinction events that helped them survive. But what the physiology is backed up by is studies showing that long-term studies that showing that people who are exposed to artificial light after dark, who have inverted sleep-wake cycles like shift workers, they have increased rates of cancers, they have obesity and metabolic disease much higher than that can be explained by food. So that's the key point, is that light and a circadian environment is modifying and metabolism. It's not only a food story. And getting the light on our side when we're trying to eliminate visceral fat and lose weight is essential, which is what I talked about as well. So it's the food diet and the light diet, and if you do both, then we can get to optimal health.
So what I like to say as well is that, like, the food diet is great, it's really good for reversing diabetes and getting your life back on track. But in the long run, if you don't fix your light environment, you will still end up with those neurodegenerative conditions and those cancerous conditions because you only fixed the food. And so in the short term, you think, it's great, I've reversed my diabetes, I'm happy, I'm losing weight, I've got more energy, but it's going to catch up with you in the long run if you don't fix your light environment. That's how serious this is. So I'm thinking long term for you guys. I'm not thinking the next 2 years. I'm thinking the next 40, 50 years.
Dr. Khan, you up the back. Hello.
Be nice, Jake, be nice.
You touched on earlier the question about factory farmed animals. Anyone who's ever grown a vegetable or grown grass or grown a tree knows how important light is. You have a cloudy day and it all stops. If you put your pot plant inside in the garage, it dies. 99+% of broilers, meat chickens in Australia, will see light on one day, and that's the day they leave the shed and hop on the truck and go to the slaughter yard. 99% of pigs would see light one day in their life, and it's the same day. 60% of eggs produced in Australia. What does that do to our food?
Great question. I'm going to have to go a bit technical here, guys. So one of the things that the light of the sun does is it moves around an important isotope of hydrogen called deuterium. So hydrogen is like the basic element of which all elements of the periodic table are built off, and it's got one proton and it's got one electron that's orbiting the proton, if we think simple classical physics. But deuterium is the same thing with an extra neutron in the nucleus as opposed to just a proton. And so when you have this deuterium as like a heavy hydrogen, the only thing that can move deuterium around into the right parts of the body for whatever organism it is sunlight. And so when you're growing plants or even animals, that are lacking in sun, then the deuterium gets stuck in the tissues as opposed to in the plumbing system, which is, you know, the blood and the cardiovascular system. Because we as human beings, we have deuterium in us. Deuterium's in the water, deuterium's in ocean water, but we don't want it in our tissues, we want it in our blood. And there's a specific reason for that, and only the sunlight can do that. The same thing is happening with chickens, with cows and pigs, etc. So we were talking about like visceral fat earlier. Why is the visceral fat showing up on an MRI? Because it's packed with deuterium. And deuterium has a different magnetic flux to protons, which is why it gets picked up on an MRI. So when you're growing foods in greenhouses, which are bending the light as it passes through, or if you're growing plants or broilers in confined spaces where there's no natural light, those foods are going to be higher in deuterium, and they're going to be lower in natural light storage. So I spoke earlier about how the fifth cytochrome, if you guys recall, the proton comes down through the fifth cytochrome and ATP is made. You guys all remember that? Deuterium's too big to fit through. It's literally physically too big to fit through. It's that heavy hydrogen proton that can't fit through. And so then the mitochondria breaks down. So these foods, these plants, these animals that are growing in these unnatural environments are high in deuterium. That's the quantum angle behind why processed foods are not good.
I'll do two easy questions. Do you like and use red light therapy? And have you got any suggestions of EMF blocking devices, fabrics, clothing that you find useful?
Good questions. I like red light therapy. I use red light therapy. My favorite brand is EMR Tech. So I would recommend that. And do I wear any EMF blocking devices? I don't. There's conjecture about that, because some people believe that if you're wearing like an EMF shirt or something, it can actually lock in the dangerous frequencies inside you and can't get out. I go with the as most natural approach as possible, which is lots of magnesium, which can be found in, you know, oysters and beef liver, etc. Magnesium is really good as an EMF protectant, and the other one is vitamin D, which I like to make myself, as you guys can see.
Just a quick question, or just clarification, just over here. Yep. Just for those who haven't or are new to grounding, what can't you ground on in the natural environment?
What can't you ground on in the natural environment?
Yeah. Bitumen, things like that.
Okay. So like the best grounding is grass or any type of wet natural ground, dirt. If you're at the beach and you're going to ground in the wet sand as opposed to the dry sand, because when it's wet, there's a better conduction of electrons. Apparently you can ground if you're on concrete, but any other surfaces like a wooden deck or bitumen or tiling, etc., the electrons aren't going to get through. Yes, Ben. I'll repeat the question if you want to.
I quickly forgot my question. Yeah.
When I was a boy, I used to watch country practice, and I remember matron Sloan, I think he was the matron we were scared of. She used to always go on about the sun and wheeling the patients out in the sun, which I always thought was weird. And the other one I also think, there was this famous picture, kids in New York, they used to put them in little cages that would protrude outside of the building. And then what was the other one was the TB patients. I think they used to wheel them out and put them in the sun. So almost like a chafy thing. What's happened? Like we used to know this, and now we don't seem to know it anymore.
It was possibly written out of medicine, and that's our job to write it back into medicine. as simple as that, really.
Can I just make a point on that as well, Jalal? So yeah, heliotherapy was something that was practiced very, very readily for treatment of tuberculosis and a range of other infectious diseases. I think that the most practical or pragmatic answer is that it wasn't able to be monetized. And once you've got a whole medical paradigm that is working on the basis of profiting off pharmaceutical medications, something as simple as putting something in the sun becomes sidelined. Even as an adjunctive therapy, it costs nothing, but it would even be assisting as an adjunctive therapy, but it isn't being done. And the data on vitamin D levels and vitamin D deficiency and the severity of influenza seasons, of COVID that we had recently is unequivocal. And people who are having low vitamin D levels, which is simply a proxy for inadequate sun exposure, it's unequivocal that those have poorer health outcomes. So it needs to be brought back, and it's free and it can be done safely.
My question was about alternative light sources in the house. Do you use candles, and do you recommend candles?
Candles are great.
Candles are great.
Yep.
And the next best would be incandescent bulbs, is that right? Or
candles are the best as a alternative light source, because the only two sources of light that we have evolved from, or three, would be the sun, the moon, and fire. So candle replicates that. Next best is incandescent bulbs, which they've apparently banned from the 1st of July in the US. So why is that? Obviously. And so then the next best up would be like any source of artificial light which is void of blue light. And so there's websites that you can buy that from. But here's the key thing as well, like just because you might load up your house with like all the lights which have no blue light in them, it doesn't mean that you should be bathing under red light as well. Like you want your house to be as dim as possible after sunset. Move out. Yeah, I mean, you could probably do some orange cellophane or red cellophane, and if you want to test that with a light detector to see if it has actually changed the spectrum, it could be effective. But for you, I'd probably go hoodie, balaclava, glasses. 460 to 480 is the main ones. Oh, was your question, do we know the light spectrum of moonlight? Of moonlight, I haven't looked into that. That's a great question. The moon isn't bad for you though, like the moonlight. Yeah. I would believe so. I think there is correlations between like a full moon and it affecting one's sleep, and also even menstrual cycles for women as well. Yes.
Yeah. Jalal, thank you for this, because it's really beautiful and it's really peaceful, and it's joy. And
love you,
Alistair. I was
Alistair.
just wondering, can you call the proton gradient test that Dr. Jack talks about, please? Can you prescribe that? Can you call it?
The proton gradient test?
Yeah, you know your gradient?
Unnecessary.
Okay.
Don't overcomplicate it.
Okay, thanks, cool.
Yeah.
Rob?
Just wondering, there's quite a few people around the world with lens implants in their eyes, and I presume, given that all spectacles, or 99% are UV blocked, I presume that the lens implants, I myself was one of them. I've had quite a few eye ops and ended up with artificial lens implants that I don't know, do you know whether they block UV? And I guess the second part is then what hope is there for us?
Great question. So the eye has UV receptors called neuropsin, and a lot of the lens implants remove the tissue that has the neuropsin in it, which is not ideal. So if you were to be out in UV light, I would still take the sunglasses off and the glasses off and just have your naked eyes exposed. But I'd also have as much skin showing as possible, because your skin also has neuropsin. So that is your backup. That you actually have to like basically be practically naked as much as you can, so that you can bypass the neuropsin that's been taken out of your eye. And so that means there are clothes that you can buy with, there's a couple of brands, one is Kiniki, one is Cool Tan, where they've got little pores in the clothes, so it's kind of see-through but not. You're a guy, so just get a dark color, and it allows the light to get through. So like I've got a pair of Kiniki shorts, so when I'm out in the sun, that's all I wear, and so then my whole body's still getting exposed. And that's what I would do if I was you.
I'm just going to comment also, Rob, on the question about do intraocular lenses block UV, and I've been looking into this for a patient, and they do. Most of them block most of the UV light. There are some brands that have a little bit of, particularly I believe UVA. They let a little bit of UVA in, but as a rule, most of the intraocular lenses will block UV, and that, I think that's a legacy of the basically this paradigm, which mirrors the kind of attack on saturated fat from a nutritional point of view, is the attack on UV light and the ascribing of harm of UV light, especially with regard to skin cancer. So as a result of that, it's just like all the low-fat food in the supermarket, all the intraocular lenses and most of people's eyeglasses are blocking UV light, even though biologically we have ultraviolet light detectors in our eye and on our skin. And as Dr. Jack would say, does nature make mistakes? Nature never makes a mistake. So there's a reason why we have ultraviolet light detectors in our eyes and in our skin. So I think it's going to be a future endeavour to get a prosthesis or a manufacturer to manufacture intraocular lenses that don't block any ultraviolet light.
And just to touch on the whole UV story, UV's got a really bad rap for several years, but what if I told you that your body makes UVC light, and UVC light is stronger than the sunlight that reaches Earth? So you're actually making light that is stronger than the sun that's reaching Earth. So how can UV be bad? Because it's not. You just have to know how to use it safely and correctly.
I don't know where I read it, but they were saying that people who don't eat vegetable oils don't burn. Which I find interesting, because when did the whole cancer thing start? Vegetable oils started with margarine. Do you have any information on that?
I would say, what do you think, Max?
So undoubtedly, again, more anecdotes. When people cut out seed oils, their ability to burn just goes away. And we know that certain medications increase photosensitivity. If you ever taken doxycycline for malaria prophylaxis when you're traveling, or for any other infection, we say avoid the sun. You become more photosensitive. Same thing with a medication, isotretinoin. There's a range of medications. So it's not too far a stretch to realize that what we eat affects our ability to sunburn. And definitely having a higher proportion of oxidizable omega-6 fatty acids in our skin is making us burn more.
Yeah, it's changing the omega-6 to 3 fatty acid concentration in our cell membranes.
Yeah, and I definitely think that is one of the reasons why people might be burning above and beyond what they would have with the same amount of sun exposure compared to previous generations.
Bang. They're also wearing sunglasses. Yes.
Hello. Just a very simple question, please. Your glasses, do you promote a certain brand, a certain colour? I have a pair of a certain brand, but they're not quite as orange as yours. And do you wear them through the day as well and change it when the sun goes down, or you just wear the same?
So there are two main strengths that you can buy. This one is the strongest one, but then there's one which is not as strong, and it probably allows 50% of the blue light to come through. You can probably wear that one throughout the day, and then come sunset, that's when you whack these ones on, in terms of promoting a brand, I'm not really a salesman at all, but I feel that the easiest company to work with is blockbluelight.com.au, and I've bought from them and have been happy with them, and most of my clients who've bought from them have been pretty happy as well. So there are other companies globally that have some really nice frames as well, like if one is fashionably inclined, but it's pretty hard to make these fashionable because you do. Nice. Rhythm Optics in Melbourne.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Yep. Yep.
So Tracy's got a question. It might be the final question, and then we'll wrap things up. And if you want to ask Dr. Jalal or anyone a question, we'll.
Mine is actually just an N=1. I'm the mother of a type 1 diabetic, and back in 2018 I was really concerned about her blood glucose levels, and she was about to go into high school and needed a laptop, and I was so concerned because of course when's she going to study? At home at night time before bed.
Of course.
And I noticed that her levels started to go a bit cattywampus, and I got in contact with Andy Mant, who runs is it Blue Blocks, I think, over in Western Australia.
Yep.
Anyway, he sent glasses to me. I got a pair for all 4 of my children. And within the first night, she put the glasses on. I had to correct her all night because she kept dropping low. By the second night, we dropped insulin by 2 units.
Wow.
So that's just an anecdotal story of a type 1 diabetic and that insulin and everything. So.
And aren't you a great mum?
Oh, don't ask my children that one, but yeah. So all 4 of my children are actually experiments. I've got one child that will wear yellow glasses to school, and that's helped calm him down because that's lowering, because I know he's affected by the light as well. But all 4 of so we were prepared when lockdown happened. All 4 of my children had clear glasses to wear in front of the computer while they were doing homeschooling. They also have yellow glasses and they also have red ones, and they all wear their glasses. You know, they get yelled at if they don't. Yeah. So I'm sure my neighbours hear me yell at them, but we all have our glasses. And another N=1 story, I'm from Queensland, moved to Canberra, got really, really sick. I'm not used to daylight savings at going to bed at different times because I'm up with the sun, down with the sun. And the glasses saved my life because I could wear them and go to bed at a normal time, not 11 o'clock. I could go back to bed at 8:30, which my body likes. So the glasses are really, really, they're just amazing.
It's non-negotiable. When I work with someone, there's 2 non-negotiables. Get sun, I don't care what time, but get sun, and block blue light. If they're not prepared to do that, I'm not working with them.
I'm a health coach, and I've got one lady at the moment who we've got her levels down pretty good, but she's still just sitting just a little bit, almost a 1 millimole, a little bit higher than she likes. And I said to her the other day, go and get some blue light glasses and let's see what that can do, because everything else seems to me spot on.
Yep.
So thanks very much for this. This was, thank you.
No, that's a pleasure.
Yeah, and thanks for that anecdote. That proves what Jack Cruz in an N=1, the principle that the blue light is sufficient on its own to raise blood
she's
glucose.
18 now and she's going clubbing, so she's out in blue light a lot, and you can see, again, my favourite word, cattywampus, those bloods go a bit squiffy when she goes out clubbing, and then it might take a couple of nights, but she gets back into a good rhythm. But yeah, when she goes out clubbing, we're all over the shop. And I swear it's to do with the light.
And the thing is that these are the anecdotes that are important, because the plural of anecdotes, as Farmer Jake says, is data.
All right, well, can we get a massive round of applause for Dr. Jalal Khan?